So yeah, the effect of water recreation on Canada goose abundance in northern wild rice bays. And I did this with the Lake Superior National Estuarine Research Reserve equipment and with funding from the Student Undergraduate Research Fellowship. So I guess I'll go into a little background about wild rice first. So wild rice is most abundant in, the Zani palustris wild rice that we know about up here is most abundant in Minnesota and northern Wisconsin. And it requires a kind of certain habitat, which is like 6.9 to 8.8 pH, so a little bit more basic. And then it also grows in a siltier or muckier sediment and at a little bit shallower depth, so 10 centimeters to a meter. So you usually find it in like shallow streams, rivers, and lakes kind of thing. Like I was saying, there's a couple different types of wild rice. There's Zania aquatica, which is a lot taller, and it's like a variety that has a smaller grain. And then there's Zania palustris, which is a smaller wild rice plant, but has larger grains. I think there's one other one called Zania texana, which is not in our region at all. But the Zania palustris grows in our region, and then Zania aquatica is down in Florida, I think. There's a lot of cultural significance in wild rice. For one thing, it's delicious, and it's valued in Ojibwe culture as their traditional food. There's also a lot of ecological significance behind it, in that muskrats eat the stems, and the rice matures. When the rice matures, red-winged blackbirds will occupy the wild rice beds. It's also a habitat for juvenile fish as well. One of the issues that have been facing wild rice in more recent years is that it's been declining in abundance in the St. Louis River. And the 1854 Treaty Authority put out a report called the 2018 Restoration Monitoring Report, and they recorded that the abundance of wild rice has been declining in more recent years. There's a couple reasons for this. One of those being rising water levels. Another reason being sulfide, but I don't think that's a problem in our river. I don't know if it is or not, but another issue is which is the focus of this study, is the problem of goose predation. Just geese eating up too much wild rice. So I also want to go through the growth stages of wild rice. So there's 3 different stages. One of those being the floating leaf stage, and then this appears in early to mid-June, and it'll usually show up as like a thin leaf across the top of the water. It's pretty familiar looking to something called a floating burrweed, which is also a thin leaf going across the top of the water, but the difference between these two is that floating leaf wild rice comes to like a kind of a pointier tip. Like if you look over here, sorry, I'm on a different screen. If you look over here, it comes to like a pointed tip, and then over here it's a little bit more round. And then there's also a difference in how the leaves look on the underside, I think, as well. In the floating burrweed, it kind of looks a little bit more checkered board pattern, I'd say. And I think there's also some differences in color. So floating leaf wild rice is kind of a paler green, and then the floating burrweed is kind of a darker green. So that's the floating leaf stage. The next stage is the emergent stage, and that's when the wild rice starts to pop out of the water in later June to early July. So when you see this, it'll appear as like some hollow stems coming out of the water. I don't know how easily mistakable that is for other plants. Maybe like a bulrush. I think those are kind of similar looking. You see like a round one. But yeah, no, they're pretty hollow stems too. So if you squish them, you'll feel that they have a little bit of give to them. And in this stage, they also start to develop these flat aerial leaves that arrange alternately. And to explain that, alternate is like so if the leaves are opposite, they're like right across from each other like this. But alternate is when it's opposite like that, but also kind of offset, I think. Again, correct me if that's not right. And then the next stage of wild rice is the flowering stage, which appears in later July. And in this stage, you'll see female flowers at the top of the plant, which appear before the male flowers at the bottom. And this is what the flowers look like. They come in these little things called spikelets, which are just pretty much mini flowers connected to a larger stalk, I think. Oh, and then this is actually one of the wild rice from the field. And you'll probably notice that they've been eaten a bit. And compared to don't know if you ever look at photos of wild rice. Usually, if you look up those, you'll see that they're in large, fields and patches of wild rice. But what it looks like in our region is more like this, just a little bit more dispersed, and you'll have these, grubbed areas, and they're not as healthy looking as in some other bays. So yeah, that's what we're trying to work to fix in our bay. So I'll talk about Canada geese as well, I guess. So they were once endangered in our area, but in more recent years, they have been far more abundant. So yeah, if you look over here on this graph, you can see we're in the breeding range of Canada geese. And I think in the 2013 Fish and Wildlife Report, it says that there was around 5 million breeding geese around 2013. So now there's probably plenty more. But there's a couple possible reasons for why there's so many geese. I think it's probably due to agricultural grain waste or grass, and there's just a lot more things that supply them with food now, maybe. But yeah, they're pretty much everywhere at this point. If you guys want to learn more about geese, go to the IUCN Red List. That's a good area to learn about them. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. So there's a few different ways that people use to get rid of Canada geese. Some of the more questionable ways include stuff like egg oiling, which is where they pour oil over the newly hatched eggs of the Canada geese, which kind of, I think, fills in the pores and then suffocates the growing embryo inside. And then there's also stuff like nest removal, which causes the geese to fly to a different area. And then there's stuff like killing geese, which obviously people don't really want to do. So there's some less questionable ways that people can use as well, like enclosures, which is where they put up a kind of fence around the wild rice, and that's supposed to, the idea of that is to keep them from flying into those areas to eat the wild rice. There's also stuff like coyote decoys, but they only work on land, silver tape, and noise-making gadgets as well. But the point of this study was to determine if kayaking could be a plausible method for deterring the geese. So yeah, like I said, wild rice is culturally and ecologically significant. Goose herbivory is one of the factors declining to their contributing to their decline in abundance in the St. Louis River. There's a few different methods for deterring geese, like noise-making gadgets, coyote decoys, and stuff like that. But the point of this study was to see if an alternative, kayaking or canoeing, could deter the geese from the wild rice bays. So to do this, I set out 8 different trail cameras, and I had 8 different bays to set these trail cameras in. All these were areas that grew wild rice naturally or have been reseeded with wild rice. So I don't know if it has the pointer on here. If you look over here, you can see that these visited bays were a little bit more accessible by boat launch. So, a lot easier for people to accidentally stumble upon. And then the unvisited bays were a little bit more enclosed in these sort of, more hidden areas. Oh my gosh. And then, yeah, like that too. And then you can see over here, unvisited site at Clough Island. It's kind of hard to get to, but still fishermen you see over there. So there's unavoidable people that sometimes go into those unvisited areas as well. But so I set trail cameras out at these 8 different bays, and I set them all facing north so I could try to avoid glare from sun that could like distort the vision of the footage as well. Yeah, I set them out around June 18th, and I had them taking a picture every 10 minutes. Sorry, I'm trying to scroll down on my notes, but then when I do that, it switches the slide. But they were taking photos every 10 minutes, and it ended up finishing the recording around July 24th, and that's when I took down the cameras. With these visited sites, I was trying to get as many volunteers to go out and deter geese on those bays as I could, and had a few different methods for this. One of those would be Craigslist. Let's use Perfect Day Duluth and other sorts of outreach. I also use geocaches, like you can see in this top right corner over here. The point was to have them overhanging the water so people would go out by kayak and try to get to them. I did have a bit of trouble finding volunteers right away, so I was lucky enough to have Julie O'Leary which is the ERSC administrator over at EWS. She sent out a circulating email for me, which got me a bunch of goose deters. That was pretty nice. But yeah, every 2 weeks I would go out and pull footage from the cameras and review it to determine the best time of day to go out and deter the geese. I ended up finding that was around the morning or night. And yeah, at the end of the study, around July 24th, I took down the cameras and reviewed all the footage frame by frame and compiled it into Excel. But I'm going to talk a little bit more about the geocaches as well. So I use these to get more visitors at my visited sites, and the idea was people would kayak out and retrieve them. But I had them hanging off of trees, hanging off of like whatever other structure was in the water. Unfortunately, a lot of people just kind of walked in or climbed the trees over the water to get to the geocache, but it still did get me some visitors, and if they went by the camera, I was able to count them as somebody in the bay, so that's pretty nice. Another issue I came across with this sort of study was just loads of data I ended up getting. So there was a lot to review. I had 8 sites, and they were all recording for a month for 12 hours a day, and they're recording every 10 minutes, which ended up coming around to like 30,000 frames I had to review. But yeah, this was hours of camera footage. I ended up just bunkering down at the University of Wisconsin Superior projectors, just reviewing footage for a good amount of time. And yeah. Also had issues with cameras. Like if you look down in this bottom left photo over here, there was a bit of trouble with resolution. That was kind of a hard one to fix. I mean, probably just need to get a camera that's better with long distance, but their trail cameras, I think they're made more for like seeing animals up close. But yeah, I made sure that I could identify a white band around the neck of the goose, and if I could, then I would count it as a goose. Other issues were like stuff like vegetation growth. If you look at the top right there, there's only really 2 ways to get around this, I think, which would be putting it up in a higher location on a tree so it goes over the vegetation, or just removing vegetation. But yeah, there's areas like this where it's kind of hard to avoid having stuff grow over. That was in Pokegama Bay. And then yeah, the only other camera issue was just being able to actually find them after you set them out in the bay. It's a bit of trouble relocating them. You had to like get a GPS coordinate and take a picture of the camera. So then this is actually from 2019. The St. Louis River Alliance did something similar to this with getting people to go out and deter geese. But here's what some of the cameras look like over there. They were facing parallel over the water, and all of them were facing north. So yeah, get good photos from that. And another issue I had with this deterring project is finding reliable sources of transportation. So at the time I was driving a 2002 Sebring convertible, and I kind of had to get a little bit creative with how I would move the kayaks. And this is what I ended up having to do, just plop it in the passenger seat and drive off. So I had to ratchet it down and figure out a good way to get it around. It's technically not illegal. As long as you have a 365-degree vision around the car, it's perfectly fine. And if it's strapped down, it's good to go. So if any of you have a convertible and need to move a kayak, that's your way. So yeah, after I got everything compiled and got all the data analyzed, I was able to get some of these things. We see here is a graph showing the date of the study and then the number of geese in all the sites combined. And what this shows is that most of the geese ended up showing up in the bays in the flowering leaf stage. A lot of the spike actually came due to Walleye Alley Bay, which was a bit of an outlier. It had less wild rice biomass, but a lot more geese. So kind of showed up as a spike over here. I don't know if this means that more geese just frequent the bay when it's flowering, or if they just, I don't know, prefer to go to the bays during that time. The geese also frequented the bays around dawn and dusk times of day. So if you look over here, this is every time of day over the study. I mean, for each day, and then it was every day the study combined at that time of day. And then the number of geese over here. So I ended up finding that the geese were generally in the bays around morning and at night. and I think they usually avoid it at midday around this area. But yeah, I don't know why they avoid the bays around noon. Probably possibly due to the heat or the horseflies. That's why I would avoid it. But yeah, best time to deter geese is around 8 a.m. So kayak early if you end up going. And then these are my main results, and this is showing the visited bays versus the unvisited bays. And what it shows is that generally the areas that had more human hours generally had less goose hours, and the unvisited sites with less human hours had more goose hours. So, yeah. What else do I want to explain about that? Yeah, so this suggests that kayaking and canoeing could be a plausible goose deterrence method for removing geese from wild rice bays. And this was some extra stuff added in there. This wild rice biomass data down here came from the 1854 Treaty Authority Wild Rice Restoration Monitoring Report. And I compared it against the goose hours in my study for site, which, sorry, I just looked at this earlier today. But what it shows is that there was generally more geese in the areas that had more wild rice biomass, with the exception of the outlier of Walleye Alley Bay up here. Which had a lot less wild rice biomass, but more goose hours. But that could also be a product of having more goose hours that there's less wild rice biomass, because these two sources of data came about a month apart. I think the my goose monitoring went from late August to early September, and then, no, I mean, sorry. The surveys went from late August to early September, and then my monitoring went from June 18th to July 24th. So there's about a month between these two. So yeah, to conclude, I ended up finding that the geese went out around dawn and dusk times a day. There's a high frequency of geese in the flowering leaf stage of wild rice. Non-motorized water recreation could be a plausible goose deterrence method, and geese may frequent the areas with more wild rice. Yeah, I don't know, do you want me to do one
Uh,
more?
yeah, let's just pause there and see if anyone has any comments and questions. Feel free to unmute and chat, or put them in the chat box as well. We'll just pause for a second, see what people want to talk about, but it looks like you've got more photos that you can share too.
Something I was thinking about is, when it's flowering, that's also when the babies are big, the goose babies, I mean. So maybe that's like a population peak. I don't know. I don't know if there's any way to tell, but it was just a thought I had.
Yeah, I don't know what else to add to that. So you think they're out there like oh, that's the smart idea. Try to get more traffic over there.
Yeah, I was gonna add too, Sam, that geese are generally morning and evening higher activity. So I think that just might be a reflection of their kind of natural habit, in that they sort of hunker down in the heat of the day.
Okay.
I'm not a goose expert, but
Right.
I think I remember something about that. If anyone on here is a goose expert, please chime in.
Thank you.
Yeah,
that was actually my dad's idea. I thought it was good though. That was fun. They're still out there if anybody wants to go get geocaches.
I want to note too that like, you were counting incidental recreationalists too. So that's like motorboats and, the pontoon cruises out there and all that sort of stuff. Did you find that your choice of unvisited versus visited sites was kind of correct? Like the choice to make those sites, the two distinctions, were right after looking at sort of your incidental recreationalists?
Yeah, well, I still counted the human hours from the unvisited sites as well. towards the final graph, but I don't know. Yeah, I don't know how you could get away from that. Can't stop people from being in the bays, really.
Yeah, so Heather has a really cool idea about, turning to citizen science for this. Like I know how much work you did reviewing that footage, because I just peeked at like a couple hours of footage, and I know how hard that was. So any thoughts to how you could delve it out to a bigger community of people who could review this footage?
Well, to make it like a citizen science thing? I don't know. Maybe if you had like an app where people could just review it on that or something? I don't know. Or, yeah, I'm not 100%.
I've heard of artificial intelligence methods of analyzing like trail camera data. So I think there's something along those lines that Google does. So you could potentially automate it, even if you
Something
have.
like that.
You had 30,000 photos. Is that what you said?
I think it came out to something like that because it was supposed to be a month of recording, but some of the areas went a little longer too. So.
Man, yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah, it was a lot.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Sam, looks like we got a question from Kurt in the chat box. Did you get any useful data on whether the dogs that sometimes accompanied paddlers provided any additional deterrence?
I didn't see anybody with dogs while paddling. Well, what were they on, like stand-up paddle boards or something?
I'm not sure.
I'm guessing.
I know
never...
Kurt paddles with his dog in the canoe.
Oh, okay.
And the dog sometimes bails out, but beyond that, I'm not sure what maybe he's getting at.
I should also note that we had the cameras again out there in 2019. So Sam finished up his study in 2018. We had them out there in 2019, and I had the silly idea that I wanted more footage. So I had them recording every 5 minutes instead of every 10 minutes.
That'd be so much.
And so we actually do have some data that some master naturalist volunteers are going through right now. And I am really curious about that Zooniverse and some sort of automation, because it is really hard to determine what is a goose. And I had more appreciation for what you went through, Sam, after looking through some of that. I was like, is that a goose? I don't know. So there is sort of this nuance to it, I guess.
Yeah, if it's under like a weird light or if it has a fog in front of it or something, it's kind of hard to tell.
Yeah, Sam, I thought I could add a little context to my question there. I was hired deterrents who got to paddle morning and evening. And the first couple of weeks that we did that work, we only paddled. And after that time, we were invited to bring our dogs if we wanted. And I did, I think, every single time I paddled after that. And we tried to record data on, well, I don't know if you call it data, just anecdotal evidence about whether we felt our dog was providing any additional deterrence. But I'm guessing it's anecdotal, and basically one of us was out there with a dog all the time, and a couple other people brought a dog a couple of times, so not enough to go on would be my guess.
Right. Did it seem like they were leaving the bays more when there was a dog in the...
Well, my canine partner and I could cover a lot more territory. I put a hunting collar on him, an e-collar that I use to make sure that I could bring him back even if his prey drive was really amped up. And he would leap out of the canoe and swim. So, you know, essentially it was like having one other boater out there. I wondered if they could smell him, or I know that there must have been times that they could hear him whining in excitement. And my suspicion is that it made him more nervous, but I don't know.
Yeah, maybe they just see it and Mistake it for a coyote or something. I wonder.
Thank you.
Oh, cool. Thank you.
Sam, Heather's got a question about how far in advance did you start recruiting paddlers?
It wasn't super in advance. I think right after putting in the surf project, I think it was like a month before I started the project, right after submitting the proposal. So didn't have a whole lot of time to start getting volunteers, but I was able to get a lot of family to go out with me, so that was nice. They can't really deny me. So, but yeah, no, probably had like 2 weeks of time to get volunteers, I think, I'd say, about that.
I have a quick question. How did you count goose hours if you're just having single images? Was it if you saw geese at one photo and the next photo that'd be 10 minutes and then another photo that'd be 20 minutes? Is that kind of how you did that?
Yeah, so if we saw them in like one photo, it would be 1/6 of a goose hour. That's what I counted it as.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
There was all sorts of discussion about how to standardize it and not, like if you get into trying not to double count a goose and you want just number of individual geese, then that's maddening, right? Like the footage doesn't tell you all geese look the same.
Yeah.
So the thought was to standardize it by time and by area, right, Sam?
Right. Yeah. I think determine the area by how far away you could identify like a white band on the paddle of my board or something like that. That's what I did. And if I could identify that, then I would count that as the edge of the viewing area or something like that. It's been so long since I've done this. I'm trying to like remember how I did it.
So we have another question from Deanna. What was the most fun part of the project?
Probably just the kayaking. I don't know. I really like kayaking, so that was a lot of fun. And just seeing how it all came out at the end, probably also like putting everything through analysis and seeing what the data ended up looking like. Kind of felt good seeing that, made something out of it. So that was kind of cool.
There was actually a question further up that we might have missed about like any other cool wildlife or things that the cameras captured.
Yeah, definitely saw all sorts of cool stuff. Saw some black-capped chickadees, great blue herons, mystery birds that I couldn't identify yet. A lot of geese for sure. Cormorant. Sorts of stuff. I think some swans, even a couple.
Sam, I have a question that's maybe a bit of a backtrack, but on your map of your sites, there were 2 back in Pokegama that were seemingly right across from each other, and one was marked visited and one was marked unvisited. Can you shed a little light on how they're right across from each other and one is one way and one is the other? Perhaps I missed something.
Well, there's like 2 little kind of cutout bays, and the wild rice was supposed to grow there. It wasn't a reseeded area, so there wasn't a whole lot of biomass in that area that year though, but yeah, they're 2 separate little bays in the river, connected to the river and right across from each other. So yeah, neither of those got visitors by chance. So that was all volunteers or myself in those areas.
Gotcha.
The reserve was visiting as well when
Yeah.
we went out there to do the water quality on and
Right.
weather station.
Yeah. Well, yeah, no, there's definitely a lot of people parking at the driveway across from it too, but I don't know if Geese would have seen that.
Yeah. We got another question from Kurt in the chat box. Any talk about whether the deterrence project might be funded again this coming season? And I think that was a St. Louis River Alliance project. I don't know where the funding came from. Maybe you know a little bit, Sam?
I don't actually know where they got the funding from. I think they told me at one point, but I probably forgot at this point. I don't think they got funding for another year though.
Okay.
For that one. Yeah.
That's kind of a bummer.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean you can't go out and paddle, Kurt.
Yes. Paddling is still great. Flipping through images, did you notice any change in water levels? I definitely did see some in some areas, like in Pokegama, you could definitely notice a little bit of a change in the water level after a big storm event or something. That's kind of cool to see. I wish I would have recorded the day that that happened, but there was a few of them. So, yeah.
Sam, something that's really interesting about this project is it's sort of like captured people's imagination, you know, like, and the St. Louis River Alliance, it became actionable, right? Like, here's the thing we can do. And then they were like, let's do it. It works. So I'm just wondering, you know, is that what you expected to happen when you started out on this project?
Not really. I expected to get a few volunteers, but I didn't think anybody would probably be trying to take it up the next year or something like that. So that was really cool to see and be able to work with the St. Louis River Alliance again. Yeah, definitely. You know, they're awesome to work for, and you know, it's cool just to see it has kept going a little bit.
Are there any burning questions that you still have left over that if you could redo or elaborate on the research you've already done that you'd want to tackle?
Probably just fix those problems that I was talking about earlier, like with the camera issues, and maybe add more bays for more representative sample. But yeah, I don't know. Besides that, probably just getting better cameras. Yeah, moving them up more, getting more visitors if I could. And yeah, it's kind of hard to get a lot of visitors with more sites though than that with like a independent study though. I feel like.
Alrighty, anyone else have any more questions before we wrap up? Sam, was there any more photos or anything you wanted to share?
Just got pictures of animals. That's about it.
Would anyone like to see pictures of animals?
Well, but before we get there, Marie snuck a question in the chat box. Has anyone else done this study elsewhere? I have no idea.
Yeah, that's a good question. Probably something like it. I have definitely heard of game camera photo studies, but I don't know about Goose specifically.
Yeah, I wonder if there's maybe some other animal being deterred in a similar fashion elsewhere. I don't know what that animal might be. Have to maybe reach out to some other reserves and see if that's a thing.
Right. I'll have to look that up later. Right.
Well, how about we wrap up with pictures of animals? If you want to share.
Sure. Sounds good. Share my screen again. Oh, that's the very beginning. Just gotta scroll through that again. All right, in Bear Bay, this was from 2019. Hannah, you sent me these ones actually, I think. But yeah, got a beaver swimming across the water right there. It's kind of cool, being able to see stuff like this and record that as well. Deer going across to Bear Bay. I think that the day we were putting out the trail cameras, we also saw deer swimming, didn't we? I think that same day.
Yeah, they were right in the middle of like.
That was weird. I didn't know they do that where they
Lake.
swim across the river like that.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, down there as well. I think this was in Rask Bay, maybe. No, this looks like Duck Hunt North. Down there. That was me. And then I think that's a cormorant, but if I'm wrong, please correct me. I'm not the best at bird ID.
I think that's a green heron, Sam.
It's green heron? Okay.
Yeah, they're so cool.
I've never seen one of them.
Really see them.
They're cool looking. Like the cuff at the top like that. Oh, this was July 21st. I just kind of took this picture. I don't think this was a trail camera photo, but there was a bunch of mayflies out this day, and I just thought it was really cool. I don't know if this happens the same day every year, where they all hatch at the same time, but yeah, just kind of found that neat. They're flying all over, some in the water, following the kayaks and stuff. Black-capped chickadee came right up to the camera. I think it's a black-capped chickadee. Oh, and then that was in Walleye Alley Bay. And geese, of course, a lot of geese. Great blue heron, I think this was in Duck Hunt North. I took this one with my own camera though, and I don't think this one was, oops. This might have been a trail camera photo. I don't think so. No, it's not. That was a photo. And then yeah. Oh yeah, I wanted to see if you guys knew what this one was. I couldn't figure out what that was. It's like a too poor of resolution to ID. And that's about all I got.
Thanks, Sam. So, oh, mallard hen was the suggestion there, potentially.
Mallard hen? Okay.
Female mallard. Yeah, the light was struck her just so it made her glisten.
Looked strange. Right.
So thank you all for joining, and I want to also give you the opportunity, as we're wrapping up this River Talk series, we're already thinking towards the next one. So if this is your first River Talk, or if you've been coming to these for a long time, we like to have suggestions for things that you guys might want to hear about. So feel free to put those in the chat box or email any of us that work on River Talk stuff if you have suggestions. And then also, because we kind of moved to this virtual format, we usually try and evaluate sort of how we're doing, but I think it's especially important as we're trying to figure out how to program over Zoom. So I do have just a 2-question poll, if you're willing, as we close out here, to answer those 2 questions. And thanks again, and thank you, Sam, so much for spending your evening with us talking about your project. It was really fun.
Thanks for letting me talk.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sam.